Hey guys, Ron here. Yes, another night video. We're going to be among the boats in the harbor again. Yeah, I love it down here. It's usually quiet. As you can probably imagine, it's pretty close to my house. So when I'm getting the itch, I get out and I'm able to talk about. I wanted to do this video for a couple days, keeping this information in my head, but I wasn't able to. So here I am tonight. And we're going to talk about another interesting subject, another tragic one. It reminds me of Elvis and Marilyn, and tonight's subject is Michael Jackson. And I've done one or two videos that you can find on this channel of the home where Michael Jackson died in Beverly Hills. It was a rented home over off Carrollwood and Montevideo. I believe 100 Montevideo is the address, and it's coincidentally right across the street, literally, from where Elvis had a house on Montevideo as well in the 60s. And then further down Carrollwood, this is all walking distance, not a very big street. Everybody lived on Carrollwood on that street. I mean, huge properties. Barbara Streisand and Rod Stewart and Burt Reynolds and Gregory Peck and Walt Disney and the Rolling Stones stayed there during one of their, I don't know, it was a 72 tour, one of the tours. But an amazing area of Beverly Hills. From the outside, you know, the homes aren't all that impressive. Usually all you see is gates, but a lot of land there. So anyway, my point is that like I said, I've done the video where Michael Jackson died, at the house where he died over on Montevideo. But tonight I want to talk about just what the hell happened to him in general. I don't really need to talk about, for anyone's sake, Michael Jackson's extraordinary talent. That, by the way, everything as usual in this video is my personal opinion. I personally think Michael Jackson was extraordinarily talented, and I love to watch him dance on stage. And I'm not a guy who loves dancing. I'm not a good dancer. Watching dancing is generally boring for me. I'm not a dance kind of guy. I had to take a quarter of dance when I went to acting school. It was supposed to be acting college, American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And I hated it, and the teacher, she wasn't crazy about me either. They called it movement, but it was really dance. So I'm not a dancing person, or Dancing with the Stars doesn't interest me. But watching Michael Jackson move on stage was just extraordinary to me. And the fact that he wrote, produced, he was just an extraordinary talent. And there was something about him, in my opinion, he had just this gravitas, and Elvis had it too. I mean, just this, and I was never up close to Michael Jackson, never in the same room as Michael Jackson, unfortunately, nor was I with Elvis. But Michael Jackson just had this charisma, just unbelievable charisma. But I think there were a few things that happened, just like with Elvis. I talk about the 3 strikes in the coffin with Elvis. First being the death of his twin brother. The second one was the army, actually 4. The third one was the death of his mother. That was really big. The 2 biggest ones were the death of his mother, and the final blow to Elvis was the divorce from Priscilla. Priscilla leaving him for Mike Stone, not rich karate instructor. That, of course, she didn't end up with in the long run anyway. Elvis lived another 5 years, but those last 5 years were really bad. Well, I believe that Michael Jackson had, I think it's 4, that I counted 2 strikes, and one after another. People coming? I may have to pause. I believe Michael Jackson, even with his extraordinary talent and his extraordinary wealth, had the same kind of 4 strikes against him or so, and I'll discuss what I think those were and how it led to what I think really was a slow death. So I won't be talking, like I said, in length about his career with his growing up in Gary, Indiana, with his brothers and his sisters, being in the Jackson 5, being on stage since he was a star, since he was 5 years old, and then being a solo artist, half a dozen or so solo records and sold-out tours. I'll be talking about the man and what I think really happened to him. Let's hold here for a second. Let's start with sorry about that. So let's start with the upbringing. All accounts say that Joe Jackson the father of the Jacksons patriarch, was a kind of brutal guy. And maybe Catherine as well. But anyway, all accounts say that, including what Joe and Catherine admitted on camera, that they used to, for lack of a better term, beat the children, perhaps whip the children, definitely beat the children. And it seems like Michael Jackson either got the worst of it or was affected by it the worst. There's an interview where you see Jermaine sitting with his parents, Jermaine Jackson, after the death of Michael, talking about the things, I believe it was after the death, talking about, and, you know, basically Jermaine giving sort of tacit, like a tacit forgiveness on his part, or maybe it just didn't affect him as much. But Michael was deeply affected, apparently, by the beatings. And he really said this all his life, although later in life he also said he forgave his father. And actually, it appeared that they had a good relationship at the end. Now, also, what's interesting is, this is just a side note, but I remember being at work, a couple of things. I remember where I was. I don't want to know what was happening in there. That thing's locked. Ice machine, maybe? I remember being at work, and I remember reading on the news, it said Michael Jackson to do 50 concerts, and then he's going to give up touring. And I think, wow, Michael Jackson. I was thinking, I haven't heard that name in a while, 5 or 6 years. I thought, well, I thought he's kind of been like a hermit. What's he been up to? Then I also remember just randomly flipping through the news at work again years later, this must have been months later, excuse me, and seeing Michael Jackson taken to UCLA, which is not very far at all from where I worked, UCLA medical and cardiac arrest. I thought, holy shit, is he going to die? What happened? And the day he died, that day, I was able to go. My ex, we used to carpool in together, so she picked me up, and we went to the house on Montevideo, where he died, and there was throngs of, you know, paparazzi and fans, and people had already put up posters. Somehow we found out where it was, and we were probably on the news, although I wasn't vlogging then, and, you know, cell phones and cameras weren't as, you know, the technology wasn't nearly as great as it is now. And then we went from there up to the valley to the Havenhurst house, where the family lived and where he had grown up. And I believe he lived at that Encino House with the whole family until he bought Neverland Ranch in, I think, the mid-'80s. Anyway, no, it must have been later than that. Excuse me, pardon me. Anyway, so that's just a side note that I was there. I wanted to be part of history, I guess, even then. And I was at the, like I said, so I went to the Montevideo house where he died in Beverly Hills, and then we went on to the home in Encino where his parents lived, and probably still live there. I don't know who's there, what's happening now, but it's on a street called Havenhurst, south of Ventura Boulevard in Encino, and I'm sure I've done a video of that one as well. I'm sure I have, so I seem to remember it, so it must be in here somewhere. Anyway, so what I want to discuss is what I think happened to Michael Jackson. Like I say, I think the first strike against Michael was the fact that his father brutalized him and terrorized him. I mean, he was, I believe, and I'm going to start calling him MJ for purposes of this discussion, just easier than saying Michael Jackson, or Michael over and over again. I believe MJ was really traumatized to the point of being scared to death. And it makes sense. I mean, I've only recently learned through discussion and hearing other people and my study of psychology in general that trauma can start really at an early age with people. And if you grow up in a household where there's millions of people do, where there is chaos, whether there's physical or verbal abuse, whether there's a lot of anxiety or a lot of drama, it affects you. It really can't help but affect you the rest of your life. And I know that's the case. MJ was very open about that. So I believe that was his first strike. I believe he grew up, well, he didn't get a chance to grow up like a normal child. He was on stage at 5 years old playing with the Jackson 5. I believe what MJ said. He said, and you can see it on interviews, he said, "I am Peter Pan." And and MJ also was a bright guy, and I was very impressed by how well spoken he was. He said that he was Peter Pan, which obviously means that he was the boy who never grew up. And that's part of why he bought Neverland Ranch. He said that the fact that he was in show business all his life, at least since the age of 5, which for all intents and purposes is all his life, we can, as far as a person can remember, all he'd ever known was fame and being on stage and being with his brothers and being very lonely, which his parents also expressed, they seemed surprised. Joe said, well, he's always with his brothers. But is that enough to just be with your brothers in the group? This was the cocoon that MJ grew up in since the age of 5. So obviously he didn't, for better or worse, get the quote-unquote normal American childhood of going to school, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, dating, prom, whatever, rebelling, whatever kids do or don't do, whatever we all did, he didn't get that. Now, his other child stars experienced the same thing, but he was such an example of that, a prime example. I mean, even Elvis and Marilyn went to school and graduated high school and then got famous. But MJ didn't have any of that. So I believe we have this person, MJ, who has arrested development because of, never being out of the spotlight, and handlers and people taking care of him and all that. And he grows up, like I say, in the spotlight the whole time with this abusive past from his father, growing up frightened all the time. Concerning his sexuality, I'm prone to think, and this is just my personal opinion, folks, I think MJ was asexual. I really do. I don't think he was a sexual person, and I think it made him uncomfortable. Now, he says that he had sex with one of his wives, Lisa Marie Presley, talking about Elvis, and we don't know about Debbie Rowe because she won't say. As far as I know, unless there are interviews where she does say, neither one of them has said. She said that she entered into the relationship with MJ to give him children because that's what he wanted more than anything. I mean, some people say those children were from someone else. We don't know. I mean, someone else being the biological father, I mean. I think he was asexual. And I think that, he was not one to curse. And he, I think, had a really hard time getting into adulthood. In fact, he's caught on... Madonna befriended him for a while in the 80s, and he's caught on a phone, either an interview or somebody was tapping the phone, but he was saying, she wanted to have dinner with me because neither one of us had a date for the music award show, and then we went back, and then she wanted to go to a strip club, and I said absolutely no, which I believe, but she said that they made out. I don't know. I don't know, or more. I just don't know what to make of it. Personally, I think he was an asexual, and if he did those things with women, then I think it was to project an image that he, was not asexual. So here we have MJ becoming the biggest superstar, one of the biggest superstars of all time with his Thriller album. And then the worst possible thing, just as he's starting to bask in the glory of the Thriller album, when it's, 40 million units sold or however many, I don't know offhand. One of the worst possible things that happened to him, he was doing the infamous Pepsi commercial, and his scalp and his hair caught on fire, and there's footage of him catching on fire. And it's interesting because even then, I've always apparently had this fascination with MJ. I remember driving over outside Brotman Memorial in Culver City in January of 1984. That's the hospital where he was being treated at the burn unit there. But anyway, when he received those terrible wounds, he had second and third degree, I didn't know the extent of it, but he had second and third degree burns on his scalp because of the burns that he received there. And this was a very, very painful recovery. And when he was first in the hospital, he refused pain medication, but the pain got so much that he started accepting the pain medication. And that's when it all happened. We can trace it back to 1984. Like Elvis, MJ became a prescription pill addict, and he was an addict the rest of his life. And there was at least one intervention that I'm aware of with the family, but evidently it was not to be the place where he would quit, go clean. In fact, at one point MJ was using 14 different aliases to keep getting the pills. Now, I don't know if it were a situation where, like Elvis, whether MJ had a team around him, people getting him the drugs all the time. I don't know the specifics of it. I remember saying when he died, God, the book that comes out after this, the first book, the extensive biography, is really going to be something. But that was really a huge blow that led to his downfall. Because for the rest of his life, for the next 25 years, I think it was literally 25 years, for the next 25 years, MJ was an ever-increasing dependency on prescription meds. And he was doped up and in a stupor a lot of the time. And just like with Elvis, his rationale was he needed pills, he needed drugs to get up, to wake up, to stay awake, to function, and then to sleep. And it really was taking a huge toll on him. He also had injuries, a back injury, foot injury, and these certainly didn't help. His body and his mind really took a lot. Now, the next major factor that I believe led to his premature death was the allegations of sexual abuse with little boys. Now, the first one, oh God, I remember this too. I remember this was on the news all the time. The first one was in 1993, allegations of abuse, I believe, taking place at Neverland Ranch. And if memory serves, he was eventually acquitted of those allegations. Now, 10 years later, 2003, he was accused again. Actually, let me back up. I believe there was a payoff the first time. There was a financial settlement the first time, and 10 years later, I believe, he actually did go to trial. And then he was acquitted, or not convicted, let's say. And if you look at the footage in 2015 of MJ in court, or walking up to the court every day with the umbrella, because MJ also claimed, and you can see this in the Martin Bashir interviews, that he had vitiligo, and that he was not trying to quote-unquote be white, but that he had vitiligo, and this was destroying his skin and changing the pigment of his skin, and that he was very sensitive to sun. Can you imagine a guy who is frightened to begin with, scared all the time, having to face possible jail time, and having to appear in front of people, all the things that scared the death out of him, how he even functioned? He was already in physical pain from his ailments, and he was doped up, for lack of a better term. I can't believe how they dragged him in, how he made it. Supposedly, MJ said that he built Neverland Ranch for himself, as Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. He wanted to experience being a child. And also for those children around the world who didn't get to experience it growing up. And he said, and they turned on me. Supposedly he said, I built it for the kids, and the kids turned on me. And soul crushing. I mean, that, and if that's true, a true sentiment of how he felt, can you imagine? His whole life has been built, if that's true, about doing for other children around the world what he could not experience himself growing up. And here he thinks he's being the Pied Piper to the children. Almost like a kind of Catcher in the Rye scenario, but here he is, for lack of a better term, like I said, the Pied Piper for the children of the world. He lives to, among other things, make children happy. And he feels safest and most comfortable, according to him, around children, because adults are scary. Adults will judge him and criticize him and live a unclean life around him, and they're not innocent. The children are innocent, and they're fun, and they're funny, and they're happy. And all that innocence, and then the one thing he's living for, and then it's gone. They turn on him, and he realizes even the one thing he's lived for, children, he can't even trust children. It's very sad if it's all true. And if he didn't touch those children in an inappropriate way, even more sad. Now, he said he had them in the bed, he slept with them in the bed, and it was because he is an individual who never grew up. Now, I've seen him interviewed with Martin Bashir. You can easily find these. And he told Bashir, he said, it was interesting to me how self-aware he was. MJ was aware, he said, that people were saying quote-unquote crazy things about him. For instance, that he slept in a hyperbaric chamber. He said, it's crazy, I sleep in a bed. That he wanted to buy the elephant's man's bones. He said, pure craziness, all lies. And he was really embittered in the end. And he said very plainly how there were so many lies about him and stories about him and untruths. And then I think, the nail in the coffin was literally, figuratively, even somewhat literally, was these allegations of child abuse. I think it completely destroyed him, and you can understand it, particularly if he's innocent. Because there goes the one thing he thought would bring him peace of mind and safety, that was being around children. And after that, I suppose he felt it wasn't even safe to be around children anymore. So, looking at it from that perspective, we can imagine how he felt. So, at the end, now this was news to me. Unbeknownst to me, he was in dire financial straits. Where all the money went, I believe he had a debt of $400 million. I don't know whether it was IRS. I don't know whether it was a combination of things, but $400 million. I mean, his finances were really in big trouble. A lot of similarities with Elvis. But Elvis would just spend like there was no tomorrow, even though he always kept $1 million in the bank. And we're talking about as early as the 70s, when $1 million meant a lot more than it was in 2009. Did I say 2015 before? Yeah, I did. I apologize when I said that. I said going to court, going to trial in 2015. Obviously, I meant 2005. The allegations against MJ were in 93 and 2003, and then court in 2005. But my point is, for financial reasons, he really had to do this last tour. Now, the tour was supposed to be the This Is It tour, which he, went on and held press conferences, says this is the final curtain call. Those are his words. This is it. At age 50, he was going to do these concerts and retire. Now, the plan was, through the booker of AAG, to do 50 shows, 50 concerts. Now, he told people that his understanding was it was going to be 10 concerts. Anyway, so all of a sudden I don't know where the confusion would come from, but all of a sudden then he's looking at 50 concerts spread out over time. And apparently he was very frightened at this prospect. He knew he was not in very good physical shape. When he was arriving to rehearsals, the production people and direction people were purportedly very concerned because MJ was not in good shape. He was coming in late to rehearsals. He was missing his dance moves. He was not functioning in a way, emotionally or physically, that led them to believe that he would be able to carry this tour off. And, you know, we'll never know now, but who knows if he would have made it. It seems like it was just too much for him. And the real fun, so AEG hired, ironically, Dr. Conrad Murray to be with MJ. And we know what happened there. This was another rock doc, for lack of a better term. Dr. Murray was doing what MJ asked him to do, and MJ said he absolutely couldn't sleep. So not only was MJ taking Demerol, which Elvis took too, and other drugs, and anti-anxieties and antidepressants, but he was taking propofol. And he had been taking propofol for 60 straight days. That's 2 months, every single night, trying to sleep. And on that last day, and by the way, we've learned now, we all know about propofol now, it should only be administered in a hospital by an anesthesiologist or a physician and with someone monitoring the patient. I don't know if Conrad Murray sat in the room with MJ all those hours, but someone had to be monitoring him because he was already in a depressed state from the Demerol, the painkillers, the downers he was on, I believe he was on Ativan. And that last night, he was up all night. And at 10 in the morning, he was still awake. And he'd keep getting propofol treatments from Dr. Murray, and they weren't working. He was still awake, so Dr. Murray gave him a final propofol treatment. And I don't know whether he left the room or not, but I know that MJ died. He was not conscious. Murray tried to revive him himself. I think Murray tried to get out of town. I don't know what he tried to do, but he was in a panic. And it was finally, I don't know if we even know who made that frantic 911 call. We can hear that 911 call. I think it was a member of the security team, but a guy comes on and he says, there's an individual here, he doesn't give his name, and he's not breathing, he's not conscious. He's in bed, he's nude, and he's 50 years old, and they rushed took only 3 minutes because the fire station is on Sunset Boulevard, very close, took only 3 minutes for them to get there. And one of the firemen whispered to the other fireman, Michael Jackson. And then they knew, and they worked on him, I believe they worked on him in the room for as long as 45 minutes. And, you know, that was it. You depress your system enough, you die. Same exact thing happened to Elvis. But I think that MJ was in a psychologically and physically worn out state. I think he was dying a little bit every day. I think, like I said, I think the pace really picked up in 1984 when he became addicted to the pain pills because of his burns. And I think it really accelerated in 1993 with the first set of allegations about child abuse. And then, of course, 10 years later. And I think, can you imagine someone in as fragile a state as he was, surviving with all that? I think had not for the money, the team of people around him, the best medical care money could buy, I think someone as sensitive and frightened and fragile emotionally and physically as that man was, I think if it were one of us, just an ordinary person, I think they would have been dead years later. Either through a heart attack or a stroke because of the constant stress and worry, or because of all the accelerated use of drugs, or something else. But I think that, like I said, because he was being watched and taken care of for so long by so many, he was able to live, you know, it was a slow burn the next 25 years. That's my point. So those are my thoughts on Michael Jackson and what happened to him. Gone too soon? I don't know. It's hard to speculate what would have happened if he would have lived past 50, if he would have completed the tour. Maybe he would have done another album. I don't know. Maybe his time was past. I mean, the shows all would have, of course, been sold out. He was a legend. You get people like him and Elvis, and it doesn't really get more iconic or famous than an individual like that, including the fact that both of them had the same, neither one of them could ever walk outside, walk the streets without being recognized and mobbed. You know, I doubt Elvis was ever in a grocery store after the age of 21 or 22. MJ had never been in a grocery store. That was one of his dreams. As silly as that sounds, he said he wanted to go in a grocery store and push the cart and he said, throw the food into the cart and go to the check stand. Never done it before. I don't know if he'd ever driven a car on his own. I don't know if he knew how to get gas. Can you imagine being famous from 5? So anyway, that's the story. There's a lot to speculate on. There's a lot we don't know, and a lot that we do know. Anyway, that's my interpretations of Michael Jackson, the sad, tragic, and unbelievable life that the man had. All right, folks. Well, my name is Ron, as you may or may not know. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button, and you'll be notified when I post. And also give the channel likes. I really appreciate that, folks. And comment in the comment section if you see fit. And I will see you guys at the next location. We'll take one last look at the boats here, and then we'll be on another beautiful warm night at the harbor. All right, guys. See you at the next location. Bye-bye.